Hi, I'm Scott McGregor. Welcome to Railway Adventures Across Australia. We're going to be travelling through a fair slice of this country, riding on some great trains and meeting some wonderful characters. Adventures usually start somewhere, and that place is usually home. This is my home. So before we head off, I'd like to show you around.
This little place is actually near Mudgee in central New South Wales. Although I spend a fair bit of time in Sydney these days, Mudgee is where my heart is. You may be wondering why I've got all these old railway carriages and all this railway equipment here. Well, trains are my passion, and it's been that way ever since I was a boy, when I saw my first steam train on Orange Station. From then on, I was hooked. As you can see, the passion has grown over the years. I've collected a lot and learnt a lot, so I feel fairly qualified to be taking you on this journey. When the railway came to Australia, it really changed life. In a short space of time, we went from the horse and buggy to trains travelling long distances in previously unheard of timeframes. It was a total revolution. In many ways, the railways are the history of Australia because they played such a big part in opening up this country. From about the middle of last century, trains took people to the goldfields. They helped the pastoralists overcome their isolation and open up the interior to wool and beef production, not to mention the great wheat belts that are spread right across our nation. In short, the railway enabled our forebears to push the frontiers further and further out from the coastal cities to where the wealth and opportunities lay further inland.
Well, that was my place. But right now, I think we better get going. We've got a lot of territory to cover.
We're going to journey down the Pacific coast from Mossman in far north Queensland to Sydney, the capital of New South Wales, with a big detour out west on the way. We will have travelled 5,500 kilometres by the time we reach Sydney. The history of rail in Queensland is a rich and colourful one and has played an important role in the development of the state. It's certainly the largest rail network in Australia, extending over more than 10,000 kilometres of track. In the early days, demand for railways in Queensland was high, but because of the vast distances involved and a small population, the railway had to be built on the cheap. For this reason, Queensland opted for the narrow or 3-foot 6-inch gauge. It was the first place in the world to adopt narrow gauge as a mainline railway, and it's given trains in Queensland a special character all of their own. Like our first journey on the Kuranda Scenic Railway, one of the most beautiful railways in the world. The Kuranda Scenic Railway travels from the centre of Cairns on the coast up to Kuranda on the edge of the agriculturally rich Atherton Tablelands. Over 500,000 people travel on it every year. From 0 to 328 metres above sea level, the train takes 90 minutes to journey 34 kilometres through spectacular scenery. There are 15 tunnels and dozens of difficult bridges mounted many metres above ravines and waterfalls. It's a fascinating journey, but an ideal tourist railway. The railway is also an engineering marvel, but it wasn't built as a tourist railway. They were unheard of in the 1880s.
In those days, railways were built for hard-nosed commercial reasons, and they always took the cheapest and easiest route. If you look back into the history of the building of this railway, you'll find a bit of a scandal because the Cairns to Kuranda route was not the cheapest or the easiest.
To find out why this line was built, you've got to go right back to the big wet of 1882. Up on the Atherton tableland, the tin miners were starving because supplies couldn't get through to them along the only boggy track from Port Douglas. The Queensland Government Minister for Works commissioned Christy Palmerston, a legendary pioneer, to find a suitable route. The race was on. Both Port Douglas and Cairns formed railway leagues and began a long and bitter fight for the right to the railway. Not long after, Geraldton, later to become Innisfail, joined in too. But the government refused to hire Palmerston on their behalf, so Geraldton employed him themselves. During the year, Palmerston marked several possible routes from the coast, and the one he favoured most was the one from Geraldton. But the Geraldton Council failed to pay Palmerston, so he refused to submit their route to the government. He only submitted the Port Douglas and Cairns routes. In March 1884, the Cairns to Kuranda route was announced the winner, and the cries of foul play could be heard as far away as Brisbane. Construction was, and still is, considered a tremendous engineering feat. Built in 3 stages, hundreds of men worked on it, and many lost their lives, especially on the perilous second stage up the mountain range. Official records show there were 23 deaths in all, but it's thought that many others went unrecorded as the steep slopes, fever and accidents with dynamite took their toll. Landslides also wrought havoc during construction. Forging of the tunnels was a complex job in itself. Thousands of tons of earth and bush were removed from the mountainside.
And they did all this with buckets, dynamite, and their bare hands. There were no jackhammers and bulldozers in those days, of course.
Finally, in June 1891, after only 5 years, the Cairns to Kuranda line was open. Cairns prospered. These days, it's a vibrant international city, exuding the typical warm hospitality of the tropical north. At Port Douglas, trade dropped off rapidly after the railway was built, but these days it enjoys a new lease of life as a popular tourist resort. Geraldton became Innisfail and prospered in its own right through the sugar industry.
The Atherton tablelands blossomed because now they had a reliable source of goods and freight.
Kuranda must be one of the most beautiful railway stations in the world. It's a pleasure simply to sit here for a while and take in the peaceful old-world charm of the place, with its carefully tended gardens and hanging baskets. And Kuranda town, well, for the most part it remains a cool, sleepy little rainforest village, renowned for its resident artists. Except for when the train arrives. Then the many craft and souvenir shops spring into life at a moment's notice. One of the jewels of North Queensland is the World Heritage Daintree Rainforest, once a part of a vast forest which covered the entire Australian continent. This mystical place is a rare survivor of 120 million years of climatic change. Change that has seen the forest reduced to just a few remaining areas on the continent. The activities of the people have also taken their toll on the forest. Once it covered the plains right down to the ocean, now much of the coastal land outside the national parks has been given over to sugarcane. Mossman is a major centre for the Queensland sugar industry. It's also the home of some of the most interesting and hard-working little trains in the country.
G'day, you, George?
That's right.
Well, I'm Scott. Apparently I'm assigned to you today, is that right?
That's correct.
I'm up.
Great, come aboard.
George is a local with an interesting history. His great-grandfather came from the West Indies, and his mum is a Thursday Islander with a little bit of German blood mixed in for good measure. He reckons Mossman is the best place in the world in which to live.
I've seen a lot of pretty parts of the world, but I think this is undoubtedly the prettiest part of the world that I've seen.
And here you are amongst it every day, driving out into the hills like this.
Very, very lucky. Darcy, what's the situation back there, mate?
George has been a driver for 29 years and has watched the introduction of new technology on the line.
It's all computerised, the tipping of the cane, the weighing and all that. So we've got to be there to take the bins away so that the mill doesn't have to stop because they clamp it up to the bins. And in turn we take them away, we deliver them.
Sugarcane is actually an oversized member of the grass family, of which there are some 5,000 species. Planting takes place between May and September, and these days, just about all of it is done mechanically. Likewise, harvesting is also done mechanically. They no longer burn the crop before harvesting either, which is good for the soil, because the mulch stays on the ground. These developments in the industry have meant that the two immediately identifiable icons, the smoke-filled skies and the tough blackened Queensland cane cutter, have now disappeared from the landscape altogether. Harvesting takes place from mid-June to November and is very intense. These little trains and the mill go for 24 hours a day until all the crop is in and crushed. Around the Mossman Mill, there's a complex network of tracks that thread their way through the cane fields. Once at the mill, the cane is weighed, tested for its sugar content, and crushed to release the sugar juice. The juice is then evaporated until crystals of raw sugar form and grow. The milling process is very efficient. Just about every piece of cane is used, including the cane fibre, which fires the boilers in the plant. The original Mossman Mill was built in 1857, and looking at this crushing gear, you'd be excused for thinking that they're still using some of the original equipment. No matter how old some of this gear may be though, it must still work okay, because the original mill was designed to crush 25 tonnes of cane per hour, and at present the mill handles about 475 tonnes per hour. Sweet figures in any man's language. Well, the fires and the Queensland cane cutter may well have disappeared, but I get the feeling that these efficient little trains are going to be around hauling sugar cane for a long time to come. Time for us to head south on the Sunlander, down the Pacific coast. The Sunlander is one of a number of overnight trains that work their way up and down the coast from Brisbane to Cairns. A journey of 32 hours via some great places. The imposing landmark of Castle Hill seems to stand guard over Townsville, Australia's largest tropical city with a population of 135,000 people. The city itself is a blend of old and new, a vibrant modern city heart combining harmoniously with an older historic area. Ross Creek, an offshoot of the Ross River, is a safe anchorage for the fishing trawlers and the charter boats that provide ferry services to nearby Magnetic Island, and diving expeditions to the Great Barrier Reef. The reef is one of nature's most spectacular wonders. It's also the world's largest marine park, stretching over 2,500 kilometres down the Australian coastline. Now World Heritage listed, the scope of the reef is magnificent, encompassing some 2,900 individual reefs in an area larger than that of Ireland and the United Kingdom combined. The 400 different corals that form the reef are home to an estimated 1,500 variations of creatures of different shape, colour and size. No other place, not even on land, has a greater variety of life. But I think it's time we got around to our real purpose for coming to Townsville. The city is home to the Great South Pacific Express, Australia's answer to the Orient Express, the Royal Scotsman and all the other world-class luxury trains. Except this one, they say, is even better. These are the Queensland Rail Townsville workshops, where building of the carriages began in 1994, and where more carriages are now being built. The original brief was to create a world-class luxury train in a style that would evoke the romance of the great train journeys of the Victorian era. The problem was that the train also had to incorporate all the devices of the modern era, like air conditioning, telephones, and cappuccino machines. The designers first started refurbishing old carriages, but that proved impractical. Not only was there no room for wiring and ducting in the old carriages, but the ageing wooden frames proved unsafe. They decided to build the carriages from the ground up, using steel frames. Each of the cars is a masterpiece of craftsmanship, with hand-painted pressed metal ceilings and interior walls fashioned from the finest Queensland red cedar and Tasmanian myrtle. Itineraries for the Great South Pacific Express are planned from Brisbane, travelling north to Cairns and Kuranda, and as far south as Sydney. But who knows the potential of this beautiful train and where it might eventually journey in this great land of ours.
This is the big detour I've been talking about. I'm leaving the Sunlander here at Rockhampton because I want to head out west to Longreach. To do that, I've got to catch the Spirit of the Outback, which is just about to leave. See you on the train.
The Spirit of the Outback actually originates in Brisbane. It's a 24-hour trip if you're going all the way.
But for us, it's only a 12-hour journey through some pretty interesting outback country.
Being an overnighter, the Spirit of the Outback has all the comforts of home. First and second class sleepers, a dining car, and a comfortable lounge to relax and enjoy the passing scenery. I'm heading out west because I've heard about an interesting little branch line train. There aren't many branch line services left anywhere in Australia, and this one's under threat of closure. That's why I think it may be worth taking a look at while we've got the chance. Longreach is 1,182 kilometres from Brisbane. It was settled in the 1870s and is now the largest town in the central west of Queensland. The only way I can get out to the branch line I was talking about is by car, because the train only runs once a week. The line terminates at an isolated little settlement called Yarraka. The train passes right by a sheep property called Albilba, 186 kilometres south of Longreach, and that's where I'm heading right now. The area is known as the Barcoo Country, after the Barcoo River, the major waterway in this region. Recently, the drought finally broke here, and the pastoralists are enjoying conditions they haven't experienced for years.
Gee, the countryside looks good. So does the stock. All due to the recent rains, of course, which has played havoc with the road. It's just as well they've got a railway line, I'd say.
This region is equally well known for its sheep and cattle, which are run on vast pastoral leases of up to 50,000 hectares in area.
Whoa, emus. A whole flock of them. Gee, they look healthy. The kangaroos too.
Here we are, Albilba Homestead, my destination. I know the people who run this place. The branch line train comes on a Wednesday, which is today, so I should be able to catch up with it.
Hey! Well met.
Hey,
It's been a while, mate.
nice to see you.
Likewise.
Bill Parkinson runs about 12,000 head of sheep on Albilba. There's about 4,000 wethers in these yards, which he wants shifted onto another property about 3 days' walk away. Bill has decided that instead of walking them all the way, we'll put them on the branch line train down to Yarraka. This'll save the drovers and the sheep at least 1 day's walk. The drovers are experts at this sort of work. Once upon a time, of course, this job would be done on horseback. But these days, it's quicker and easier on a motorbike. The dog doesn't seem to mind, does he?
So anyway, we're opening up the carriages now?
Yeah, going up into the carriages. They'll all run straight through, hopefully.
Sheep are reluctant travellers on trains at the best of times. And in order to entice them into the wagons, one is tied up inside the ramp in the hope that the others will follow. The job still proves to be hard work, though. Well, the line might be under the threat of closure, but this hasn't stopped the train from running on time. It's a slow trip, apparently, from Jericho to Yarraka. The track doesn't sit on a bed of stones or ballast, as is normal on busier lines. The sleepers and rails simply lie on top of the earth, so the train has to take things fairly slowly in order to avoid a derailment.
This is what they call the drover's van, eh?
All aboard.
Once upon a time, trains similar to this one ran all over Australia. That was in the days before road transport took over. They were called mixed trains, and they serviced the farms, mines and small towns that lay off the mainline routes. They carried everything from supplies, livestock to people. The people usually travelled in a carriage right at the end of the train, before the guard's van. Our destination, Yarraka, is one of the most remote communities in the whole Barcoo region. It's little more than a school, a policeman and a pub. The people in this tiny town rely on the once-weekly train for their supplies and their survival, particularly in the wet, when you can't even get out in a four-wheel drive. There's no sealed airstrip in town either, so it's either helicopter or train. The loss of the train could well break up this community.
I don't think it would be the straw that would break the camel's back for the town, because
See, there's only 10 kids at school at the moment. Like, only 5 families have kids at the school.
So the school might go?
Well, there's 2 of the families are from the railway line. So if the railway line went bang, you only got 3 families that have kids at the school.
Right.
And that school's on shaky ground now. So if the railway line goes, then a school could go.
Only a few of these little local services are left in Queensland, and who knows for how long. They certainly don't carry passengers anymore. We were just lucky today. Time to leave our mates in the Barcoo country and head back to Rockhampton. From there, we're going to travel south once again to Gympie and visit a branch line that has gained a new lease on life. Some of the old branch lines still survive through institutions like this one, commonly known as rail or steam heritage societies. This is the Mary Valley Rattler. She runs every Sunday along the old Mary Valley line on a return journey between Imbil and Gympie. The people who keep these trains running are usually all dedicated volunteers. They invest a lot of their own time and labour, and they take the job very seriously, even down to wearing the correct railway uniforms of the period. We're looking at the early 1900s here, around World War I, which was about the time this line was opened. The line was built to supply the gold mining town of Gympie with timber and farm produce from the rich and fertile Mary Valley. The 80-kilometre return trip passes through some spectacular country and negotiates many bridges, curves and one really fine tunnel. Each heritage society has something different to offer. The Mary Valley Rattler, for example, has markets each Sunday at stations along the line.
Kandanga Station, ladies and gentlemen, you're welcome to get off. We'll be here for approximately 10 minutes.
Now, I want to head even further back into history. Well before the Mary Valley line was taking produce to market and keeping the people of the valley in touch with the rest of the world. Ipswich is the birthplace of rail in Queensland. The very first line went from here to Grantchester in 1865. This beauty was literally present at the birth of rail in Queensland.
She's the A10 class locomotive, number 6. And she's one of the oldest operating steam locomotives in the world. She was built in 1865.
Number 6 was actually the 8th locomotive to enter service in Queensland. She was built in Glasgow by Scottish engineering firm Nielsen and Company. She was shipped out to Australia partly dismantled and landed at the old Bremer Wharf in Ipswich. She was then taken to the government workshops, reassembled, tested and finally placed in service on the 20th of August 1866. A typical train for number 6 back then would have been several small four-wheeled goods wagons, a couple of passenger carriages, perhaps a horse box and a guards van. And there's no rest for the old-aged either. Number 6 still pulls special trains on a regular basis, and from all accounts, she's doing just fine too. And from the very old to the very new. The most modern train in Queensland.
I'm heading south from Brisbane to the Gold Coast. Nice train. Good track.
Well, if nothing else, Queensland is a state of great contrasts. From the Great Barrier Reef and the rainforests to the vast inland. And now this, the Miami-like skyline of the Gold Coast, a holidaymaker's paradise. And just down the end of this beach is New South Wales, and the next stop on our journey down the Pacific coast, Byron Bay. Byron Bay is the most easterly point on the Australian mainland. Therefore, the sun shines on Cape Byron first every morning. On May the 15th, 1770, Captain James Cook named the headland after Vice Admiral John Byron, the grandfather of the poet Lord Byron. The old lighthouse was built in 1901 and has played both comforter and guide to navigators sailing up and down the coastline ever since. Its light, floating in a bath of mercury, is a work of art in itself, with the intensity of 3 million candles. 175 kilometres from Brisbane and 800 kilometres from Sydney, Byron Bay attracts all kinds of people, families, backpackers and surfers. It's the subtropical climate and the magic qualities of the place that attracts them. Beautiful long beaches set against a magnificent backdrop of mountains. These qualities not only attract humans here in abundance, but also dolphins, whales, and other sea creatures. Just down the hill from the lighthouse is the village of Byron Bay itself. It's a lively place that combines the atmosphere of a country town and a beachside resort. I'm told the tourist overload during the holiday season puts a real strain on the environment, and the locals have been battling the big developers for years in an effort to avoid the high-rise fate of the Gold Coast, where we've just been.
Things weren't always like this, though. Once there was a thriving whaling industry here. That's why they call this Tallow Beach.
Whaling came to Byron Bay quite late compared to some other places in the world. The first whale was taken in 1954 and the last in 1962. The official season was from May to the end of October each year. It's then that the humpback whales migrate north from the Antarctic to tropical waters. The annual quota in 1959 was 150 whales, and by the time the industry collapsed in 1962, 1,146 had been processed at the local meatworks. There's an interesting locomotive at work in these old whaling shots. It was still in use in the 1950s when these pictures were taken. But I wonder what happened to it after that.
Well, I found it.
The Simplex was British built and had a 40 horsepower engine, giving it great strength for hauling the rail trucks and passenger cars up and down the jetty. She was a familiar and much loved sight in Byron Bay in the old days and gave faithful service to the town for over 60 years. The Byron Bay Railway Station is located right in the centre of town, which is very convenient because we'll soon be travelling south again.
I can't believe this. A pub at a railway station. Don't see that every day. Excellent.
Yeah, mate.
The Railway Friendly Bar, as it's known now, was a licensed railway refreshment room right from the turn of the century when the trains first started running in these parts. In 1952, it became a private lease, and the pub has been part of Byron Bay's landscape ever since. The pub has also become something of an icon to the sport of fishing over the years, with many a satisfied angler donating the rod or reel that caught that record-breaking fish to the pub's walls. There's my train. Time to be moving on. The service from Byron Bay to Sydney is by express train, and the journey takes about 12 hours altogether. Sydney is 800 kilometres away as the crow flies. But you know me, I love a detour. There's some pretty interesting places for us to visit on the way south, so we'll be indulging in a little bit of train hopping on the way down. This is the Dorrigo Steam Railway and Museum. It's the largest collection of railway engines and rolling stock in the Southern Hemisphere. And it's an incredible sight just sitting here on top of the mountain at Dorrigo. I decided that if ever I was up this way, I'd give my mate Keith Jones a bit of a hand with the carriage maintenance.
We've painted at least 110 in the last couple of years, so it's a big job.
How did the museum come about? What's the story behind it?
Well, it really started because I had a burning desire to save one steam engine from being cut up for scrap way back in 1973-74. And from there it's grown as the members have grown, and we're now preserving almost anything from any railway in New South Wales.
The museum is run entirely by volunteer members. There are two distinct objectives to this project. The first one is to establish a world-class railway museum, and the second, to operate a tourist railway on the disused Dorrigo branch line. But why choose Dorrigo to set up this extensive collection?
Well, in our opinion, the Dorrigo branch line is the most scenic line in New South Wales. The line's intact. It's in a good tourist region, so we should get patronage. So moving the collection from Newcastle 300 miles to here was a huge job, but we think well worth the effort.
At present, the collection boasts 54 locomotives, 280 carriages and wagons, and 13 rail motors. The locos range from 8-tonne shunting units to the massive 260-tonne Garretts, the largest locomotives in the Southern Hemisphere. Many of the engines here are over 100 years old. Just a gentle warning to all you train buffs though. If you're up this way, Don't go making a beeline for the place expecting to go riding on a train. The museum and the branch line aren't open for business yet, and don't expect to be for quite a while to come.
This is Newcastle. I'm on the local rail motor service into town. Not a bad little beast for 1948.
Newcastle is rightly called the hub of the Hunter Valley. It's a maritime city, highly industrialised, with an attractive twist to it, which I'll show you later. Originally founded in 1797 as a penal colony for exporting coal and salt, the coal exporting side of the business is still going strong. Much of the industry in Newcastle is winding down now, causing the locals to turn their minds to other things to keep their city vibrant. Tourism is high on the agenda. And with very good reason too. Remember I said that Newcastle had a twist to it? Well, how many industrialised cities in the world do you know that have fantastic surf beaches like these, bordering their inner city suburbs? There's plenty of history too. At the harbour mouth, Nobby's Lighthouse, with its convict-built breakwater, is a landmark for the ships that enter and leave the port every day. Also standing stately on the foreshore is Fort Scratchley, which was built in 1881 to defend the young colony against the Russians. Its last defence of the city was in World War II, when it fired on some Japanese submarines. The last time these guns were fired in anger. The submarines that attacked Newcastle on the night of the 8th of June 1942 then moved further down the coast and opened fire on Sydney. The Hunter Valley region around Newcastle is not only famous the world over for its coal, but also its wine. An unusual mix, you might think, but apparently these completely different enterprises manage to coexist without too many problems, much to the delight of those who earn their living from them.
The coal comes down from the Hunter Valley by train on its way to be shipped overseas. That's how I plan to get up to the vineyards. I'm catching an empty coal train heading back up. G'day, I'm Scott.
Scott, Keith Gilbert.
Good on you, Keith.
Scott.
Cheers.
How are you? Gary Hollier.
Good on you, Gary. All right. So which is our train?
That's the number of all the trucks.
Right.
And there's 84 trucks. There's 1,420 metres long.
Approximately 60 million tonnes of coal are extracted from the open-cut mines in the Hunter Valley each year. It's a tremendous amount of coal and gives you some appreciation of why these trains are so long. It's the wine industry that I've really come to the Hunter Valley to take a look at. Actually, it's a bit of an abiding passion of mine.
Very mate, we've got vineyards. We have miles and miles out here now. It's all new stuff out here.
Right.
Lines were first planted in the Hunter Valley in the early 1800s at the suggestion of Governor Lachlan Macquarie. He was attempting to break the stranglehold rum had on the colony by encouraging the drinking of table wine instead. By 1830, there were 20 vineyards producing good quality wine for the New South Wales market. Today, the valley produces over 24,000 tonnes of grapes for wine not only consumed in Australia, but exported worldwide. Brian McGuigan is a third-generation winemaker whose family have been making wine in the Hunter for over 50 years.
What's really required for good winemaking?
Well, the most important thing really is what we're walking on. That's the soil here.
Right.
Without the right soil, you don't get the character into the grapes, you don't get the character into the wine. And so the soil is of great importance, as is, of course, the weather.
Liquid sunshine in a bottle, as Brian McGuigan would say. These days, much of the harvesting is done by mechanical harvester. However, the rustic sight of people picking grapes by hand hasn't disappeared altogether. Some grapes require specialist handling, so there's still a place for the humble hand picker. The pickers get paid by the bucket. To determine how many buckets an individual has picked in a day, each person is given a number. As they empty their buckets, they call out their number and the bucket is duly recorded in their favour. They earn $1.50 a bucket, and the average that can be picked in a day is about 50. So it's hard work for a modest return. It's time to leave the beautiful Hunter Valley and head inland. The coal train will take us close to Mudgee, so I want to take you back there for a while to check a few things out.
I've come home because I want to show you my favourite railway line in New South Wales. It's the Cowra branch line, from Carcoar through to Cowra. It's a great run through some historic countryside on the central tablelands. Unfortunately, like so many other little lines around the country, no trains run on this one anymore. So I'm going to have to use my own steam.
This line was put through to Cowra in 1888, and it goes through some classic countryside in my opinion.
Never forget the rules and regulations about heading into a tunnel. Whistle! Once upon a time, these parts were alive with bushrangers, most notably Ben Hall and the John Gilbert gang. They terrorised the poor folk around here right through the 1860s until the law caught up with them and hung them. They were after the gold, of course. There used to be a lot of it discovered around here. You're probably wondering what I'm riding on here today. It's officially known as a Trafalgar velocipede, more commonly known as a hand trike. 70 kilometres an hour, they must be kidding. These little things were used in and around station yards to fix signals and do odd jobs like that. This is a rare two-man version, dates from about 1900. It must have been hard work working one of these across the countryside day in, day out. I feel like I'm making a railway exercise video. You know, you're working. Not a bad little station, eh?
Carcaw's a sleepy little town now, but back in 1866 it was the second biggest town west of the Blue Mountains. I'm going to take a break, head into town and have a cup of tea. Today, Carcaw is a lovely little spot, classified by the National Trust. Gold made these places grow, and like so many other mining stories, when the gold ran out, the town shrank. It's hard to believe now that this place was once the administrative centre of the whole Blaney district. Being an administrative centre meant lots of banks. And of course they attracted bushrangers like flies to the honeypot. In July 1863, the bushrangers John Gilbert and John O'Mealy attempted to hold up this place, which was the commercial bank back then. They failed, but they do go down in history as having carried out Australia's first daylight bank robbery. The start of a long Aussie tradition, you might say. On the surface, Cowra seems like a typical New South Wales country town, but there are special international links that make this place unique. For example, the people of Cowra go to great lengths to nurture the ideals of peace and international friendship. This is exemplified by Australia's World Peace Bell in Civic Square. The bell is a replica of the original, which hangs at the United Nations building in New York. The community's efforts to foster these ideals go back to World War II, when a prisoner of war camp was built here. Constructed in 1941, the camp initially held Italian and German prisoners of war, but in 1944, the camp was extended to hold Korean, Formosan and Japanese prisoners. Disgraced in their own minds by their capture, the Japanese sought to overcome their shame in the most dramatic way possible. At 1:50 a.m, on the 5th of August 1944, the largest prisoner of war breakout in modern military history took place at Cowra. Over 1,000 Japanese prisoners launched a suicidal attack on their guards, the Australian soldiers of the 22nd Garrison. By the time the breakout was over, 231 Japanese and 4 Australians lay dead. The Japanese who died in the breakout were buried in Cowra, and members of the local RSL took it upon themselves to look after their graves. From that first humanitarian gesture grew the desire amongst the townsfolk to understand more about the culture of a people who had once been their enemy. Today that sentiment has translated into these beautiful Japanese gardens, symbolising goodwill and a celebration of nature. These are the fabulous Blue Mountains, 146 kilometres west of Sydney and close to my destination. Up until the invention of the caravan and package tours, this was the favoured destination of Sydney-siders who wished to escape the summer heat. Now the mountains are a popular destination for day trippers who wish to take in the magnificent sight of the Three Sisters and the other natural attractions. The Blue Mountains are also the home of the Great Zigzag Railway. At just 7.5 kilometres in length, the Zigzag Railway was acclaimed as one of the great engineering wonders of the 19th century. It was opened in 1869 to enable trains to negotiate the steep western face of the mountains. The line operates between Lithgow at the bottom and Clarence at the top. finding a route over the Blue Mountains and into the rich Western Plains beyond was a real economic problem for the government last century. In the wake of the gold rush, an ever-increasing number of settlers were moving out west. People were agitating loudly for a railway connection to Sydney. After much deliberation, it was decided that a series of lengthy tunnels through the mountains was far too expensive. A giant zigzag was the cheapest option.
Well, we'll just get the air on and we'll go.
Meet Michael Forbes. He's been with the railway for over 25 years, so he knows the line like the back of his hand.
The bottom road of the Great Zigzag is still used by the State Rail Authority, so it's still part of the line to Broken Hill in the west.
Okay.
We actually have our depot on the site of the original bottom road. They just carved a giant Z in the side of the hill. So if you imagine the 3 bars of the Z are your tracks. They all slope gently down into the valley at a grade of 1 in 42. That's 1 foot down for every 42 feet you travel. And that sort of grade can be handled safely by a train.
We're on the middle road.
We are now on the middle road of the Great Lithgow Zigzag.
Yeah, see, I know the route.
Bring it to a halt. And now what we've got to do is swap ends. We've got to drive from the other end.
So we go up the other end?
Yep.
We've come up as far as Top Points. It's here that the train reverses direction to go along the top bar of the Z.
Excellent. 2 bells from the guard means everybody's locked in and we can leave.
We're now travelling along the top road of the Z towards the station of Clarence. Some tunnelling was still necessary, and there are 2 tunnels on the route. One on the top road near Clarence, which is half a kilometre long, and another on the bottom road. When this line was completed in 1869, a visiting writer from England wrote glowingly of the pluck and the enterprise of the colony of New South Wales in conceiving and carrying successfully through such a gigantic and wonderful undertaking. Lofty praise indeed, and fully justified, don't you think? Sydney, our destination, and the end of our journey down the Pacific coast. The capital of New South Wales, and home to 4 million people. Founded in 1788, it's the oldest city in Australia, and its beautiful deep-water harbour makes it one of the most famous and attractive cities in the world. Even in the late 1920s and early 30s, it was a busy city, and ferries like these kept both sides of the harbour connected before the Sydney Harbour Bridge was completed in 1932. The first train to cross the new bridge, the first of many that now carry thousands of passengers a day. This is Sydney's premier railway station, Central.
Built in 1906, 25 platforms. This grand concourse says it all.
Although we've reached the end of our journey down the Pacific coast, we're actually here at Central Station to begin another one. This time from coast to coast, from Sydney to Perth, leaving on the famous Indian Pacific. But that's another journey for another time. See you then.